Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you why the MacBook Air M1 is such an amazing laptop, especially for photographers, content creators, and even videographers. So let's go discuss it. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe and also hit that bell icon so you're notified whenever I have a new video out. Okay, so I sold my 16-inch MacBook Pro, which was the top of the line computer at the time, only 4 or 5 months ago, and I bought a MacBook Air M1. I would have never dreamed of buying a MacBook Air instead of a MacBook Pro, especially a 16-inch. But since the Apple silicone chips came and these M1 processors started getting shipped into these computers, everything has changed. In fact, the whole laptop market has changed according to me. Benchmarks, standards, they're just in a different universe now. The fact that these M1 chips are so powerful, they're so efficient, the thermals are amazing, they don't heat up, and has changed everything for everybody. So I bought this M1 MacBook Air. I didn't even go for the MacBook Pro, and to be honest, I haven't regretted it for a second, because this MacBook Air M1 is such an amazing laptop. In fact, I call it a silent beast. Silent because it has no fan. It's completely fanless. At the back there's no vent, so no dust goes in. That's an added bonus. And the biggest thing is no sound comes out of it, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I love that feature. And it performs so amazingly. In fact, if you compare this with the MacBook Pro 13-inch M1, they perform almost identical, except when you really push it, then yes, it does thermal throttle a little bit, and the performance goes down about 15 to max 20%, and it stays there consistently. It doesn't go below that even if you push it for video editing or even photography or for whatever you're doing. So let's talk a little bit more about this laptop. The form factor is awesome. This is such a light laptop. My 16-inch MacBook Pro was so heavy it felt like a dumbbell. Yeah, one of those things you pick up in the gym. But this thing is so light and so amazing. I love carrying it around everywhere. It makes me much more mobile, and it makes me be able to take my workstation, which is this MacBook, anywhere I want without having to dread lugging around such a huge, enormous weight. The interesting thing is I didn't go for 16 GB RAM in this laptop. I had a 16 GB RAM laptop, which was the 16-inch MacBook Pro right before this, but in this case I took the 8 GB. Why? Because all the YouTube reviewers and all the resources I saw were saying the same thing, that 8 GB RAM performs exceptionally well. And yes, if you get 16 GB, it will give you a bit of an edge, but honestly, with swap memory, you won't even know the difference. And I think it's absolutely true, because I'm a professional photographer. I'm also a videographer in some ways, and I'm a content creator. So I video edit, I edit raw images, I do photography, Photoshop, Lightroom, all these things. And with this 8 GB RAM, it hasn't been an impediment so far. It has worked really well. So if you guys are content creators, videographers, if you're photographers, or anybody who pushes their system, the MacBook Air M1 actually works pretty well, and the RAM is not gonna be a barrier for you, in my opinion. Yes, the fan is another story, and not such a big story, because even then it works well. I have the system, I edit long timelines. Sometimes my renders are 10, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. It doesn't really thermal throttle for me. I do shoot in 1080p. I don't go to 4K that often, and if you use 4K a lot, it will thermal throttle a little bit. But again, as I mentioned, it's only going to go down 15 to 20% in performance and stay there. And the M1s are so fast that even if you are getting a 15-20% cut in performance, it's still probably faster than most laptops out there. So it works. And render times only decrease by like just 15-20%, like I said, which is not much. If you do like a 10-minute video, we have to wait an extra minute or two. So how does this laptop perform with Photoshop, Lightroom, Final Cut, and all these other things? Very well. Now this laptop, because it has ARM architecture in it, Apple Silicon, doesn't run x86 stuff natively. It uses Rosetta 2, which is kind of interpretation software, and Adobe has not made their M1 versions yet. Having said that, Adobe, Photoshop, Lightroom, they work just as good as they did in my 16-inch MacBook Pro, which had 16 GB RAM and was a 6-core processor. I had the base model, not the 8-core. And it's amazing. I'm so shocked. Imagine when Lightroom and Photoshop get optimized for M1. It's gonna fly. It's gonna be amazing. Final Cut is optimized and it runs just as fast as my 16-inch MacBook Pro, maybe faster. Overall, in fact, with Big Sur, this laptop is snappier. It's more responsive. It just works better than my old 16-inch did. So definitely, I'm shocked that at half the price, the 16-inch base model being around $2,200, $2,300, and this MacBook Air, the base model comes at $1,000, it's less than half. However, I didn't get the base model. I got the 512 GB version in which there's more hard disk space because I don't like putting external hard drives that often. And 8 GB RAM I didn't upgrade because I didn't need to, as I mentioned before. So for performance, the M1 chips are amazing. They outperform pretty much every other laptop out there and even some huge desktops. This thing almost competes with a Mac Pro, which is like 10 times more expensive. In fact, even more expensive than that. Because of the M1 chip, it actually comes close to that in a few things. And if you're wondering if you should get the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, I would suggest just get the MacBook Air because honestly, the thermal throttle thing is not such a big deal and the MacBook Air performs almost as good as the Pro. It just doesn't have the touch bar, 100 nits of brightness is less, the speakers are slightly different, although these speakers are awesome. As itself standing, they're very good. And the battery life is a little better on the MacBook Pro. So speaking of thermals, a lot of people wonder when summers come or if it's really hot, how is this going to perform? So I did a little crazy test in which I put 2 heaters next to my MacBook Air M1 and I used it for about 8-10 minutes. So this is me using my MacBook Air M1 with these heaters right next to it. Now I made sure I didn't damage my MacBook Pro, so I was very careful. I kept checking the temperatures on the top and the bottom of the screen. Everything was okay. I opened Photoshop, Final Cut, and a bunch of things so that it's using its processor and GPU to its full capacity or to a good amount of capacity. And over these 8-10 minutes, honestly, it was no problem. It didn't even stutter. So from this, my conclusion is that even if it gets really hot, this MacBook Air can handle it and the thermals are not an issue. Yes, if you're a coder or if you are a video editor and you're using 8K or even 4K timelines and you're putting a lot of effects on and you're really pushing this machine, as I mentioned many times before, it will thermal throttle, but only up to 15-20% and that's it. So for 90% of the people, I would recommend get a MacBook Air. Get it if you're a photographer, get it if you're a content creator. If you're a videographer full-time and you do hardcore editing, then it makes sense to get the performance of the MacBook Pro with a fan, so it doesn't thermal throttle at all. I understand that. But honestly, you could get away with this as well. Also, let me quickly talk about gaming. If you play something like the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you can get a good solid 50 frames per second and above consistently, which is amazing for such a small, tiny machine with no external GPU. It's unbelievable. And this is at medium settings. If you play lesser intensive games, there'll be no issue. You can play them to their full extent, no problem. If you go for more hardcore games, more GPU intensive stuff, yeah, then your frames will drop a little, but it's still astounding how well this laptop can perform, even in gaming. And I'm sure the next chips that'll come will be superb for gaming as well. So you'll have one machine, and that will be your work machine and probably your gaming machine too. I personally am looking forward to the new M1X chips that are rumored to come, something like in the 14-inch MacBook Pro and the new 16-inch. I would love to buy the 14-inch MacBook Pro. That's kind of my idea and my plan. I might sell this in a few months, maybe 6 months, and get that. And that will be my long-term machine. Because having said that this doesn't have problems like thermal throttling that much, it will if I really push it. And being a content creator, I would want a machine with a fan for the long run, something I'm gonna keep for 3-4 years. This MacBook Air will suffice as well. It will do pretty well, but being somebody who earns money through my work, I think it's still a better investment to get that. Just currently, between this and the MacBook Pro, I recommend this because there's not such a big difference. But when the new chips come and the 14-inch MacBook Pro comes, then there's a lot of difference in the design, in the M1X chip, and all the other stuff that are rumored to come. So that makes it a worthwhile upgrade, if you know what I mean. So overall, I totally recommend the M1 MacBook Air for photographers, content creators, and even videographers who are not going to push it to its limits, just videographers. For photographers and content creators, you can even push it, and you can manage to do your work through this light, tiny, wonderful machine, this silent beast. So I would say definitely get one for yourself. Get something with more hard drive. I think that's more important than the RAM in this particular machine. Any other machine, I would say RAM is more important, not in this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. Do subscribe. I'm gonna do a bunch of videos on photography related stuff, some content creation stuff, and even some tech stuff that's all kind of mixed with each other. So till our next video, take care, bye.